Hans, wonderful to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's talk a little bit about electoral issues in America today. You know, we saw a lot of questions around the election in 2018, the midterms, and now we're galloping towards 2020. Some people would say the presidential campaign's already begun. What did you see in 2018, and what challenges can we see in 2020?
Look, America has a very decentralized election system. In fact, it's the most decentralized of any Western democracy. You know, we don't have a federal agency running elections. Elections are run at the state level and, in fact, at the county level throughout the country.
Right.
And unfortunately, while we have a pretty good system, it has a lot of vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And that's because it's really an honor system. You know, we allow people to register to vote without really checking the accuracy of the information. Many states allow folks to then go in and vote without doing something as basic as checking their identification to make sure they really are who they say they are. States aren't verifying that people are actually citizens when they register to vote, even though that's illegal. And we've got all kinds of issues like that. You may have seen that we just had a congressional race overturned in North Carolina, a 900 vote margin. And in fact, that race demonstrates an important point, which is back in 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Indiana's new voter ID law. Indiana had passed a law saying you have to show a government-issued photo ID when you come vote. Very common sense reform. It was challenged. The Supreme Court said this is constitutional. It's not a burden on voters to have to show this. But the point of the court was that they said, look, the U.S. unfortunately has a long history of voter fraud, demonstrated by journalists and historians, and it could make the difference in a close election. And we have close elections all the time in this country.
Seems like it, doesn't it?
We do, particularly at the local level. You may recall last year there was a state house race in Virginia that was a tie vote. They had to pull a name out of a bowl to determine who the winner was, and whether a Democrat was the winner or a Republican was the winner determined which party would control that house.
Unbelievable.
So what that means is we need to fix some of these problems that exist throughout the voter registration and the voting process.
So what would you say is you mentioned a few things, what would you say is the biggest problem, issue number one that we need to tackle, or is it actually a collage of issues that we have to address?
It's a collage of issues. I would say that if states that want to try to fix this problem, and remember the goal here is to make it easy to vote, but hard to commit fraud. And what states need to do is, for example, look, there are still states like New York, California, where you don't have to show an ID to vote.
That is amazing.
Isn't it? It is.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And you ought to have to show an ID to vote, whether it's in person or by absentee. Now, every state that does this, obviously, should provide a free ID to anyone who doesn't have one. But that's one of the most basic things. The second thing that states need to do is verify that people really are citizens when they register to vote. There's a couple of ways to do that. One of the most obvious is that you ought to have to show proof of citizenship when you register. Another problem that we have is it's very easy in this country to register to vote in multiple states.
Really?
And the chances of each state finding out that you're actually registered in the other state is pretty nil. I don't know if you recall this, but a couple of years ago, there was a woman running for Congress in Maryland named Wendy Rosen.
Okay.
She was
I don't remember.
No, she was running in the Democratic primary. Her opposing candidate did some opposition research on her and discovered that not only was she registered to vote in Maryland and Florida, but she had voted in both states in multiple elections, which is illegal. Yeah. She was forced out of the race. She pleaded guilty to voter fraud. But the point of that story is that this wasn't discovered by election officials.
Right.
It was discovered by opposition researchers. If she had not run for office, she probably could have gotten away with this for years, and no one would ever have known
Because this was
about
a
it.
very, very powerful microscope she was put under, obviously. Here,
Exactly
right.
right. But again, that case points out, like I said, one of the many problems. Some years ago, the Pew Foundation actually did a study.
Okay.
They estimated that upwards of almost 3 million people are registered in more than one state in the United States.
How many?
Almost 3 million.
What is that? What percentage of the electorate?
Well,
is
it's
that?
a small percentage, but
No, it's 3 million votes, right?
right. And look, we had a presidential race, right, in 2000 decided by, 500 votes in Florida. We just had a election overturned in North Carolina where the margin was only 900 votes. And remember...
A whole bunch of California votes were small margins, if I recall.
Yes, they were. And California has just passed a law recently that has made voter fraud easier to commit. They legalized what's called vote harvesting.
So this is actually, okay, so now I have two questions. But This is what I was actually thinking. If we have this situation in New York and California where you don't even need to show ID to prove you are who you say you are, that is still a bit difficult for me to fathom, frankly, but okay.
Right.
New to this game. What if there isn't an incentive to change that and it's done at the state level? So
the only thing I can say about that is that it's up to people down at the grassroots, everyday voters, everyday folks, to try to convince their state legislatures to change. New York, for example, has had a number of cases that have shown that they really ought to have voter ID, and yet the state legislature there has refused to do anything about it.
Can you just tell me in like a couple of sentences for our audience, what exactly is vote harvesting? We've heard it brandished about, but I think a lot of people don't know what it is, actually.
Look, in every state, you have the ability to vote by absentee ballot.
Yep.
In many states, you have to show that you're not going to be able to make it to the polling place because of work or because you're ill. In states that have banned vote harvesting, the rule is that once you fill out your absentee ballot, you can either mail it back, you can hand deliver it, or members of your immediate family can deliver it for you.
Okay.
That's the rule in North Carolina. Other states, unfortunately, like California, allow anybody
to
pick it up and deliver it.
So campaign people could do it.
Exactly right. It puts these ballots in the hands of people working for campaigns, party activists, folks who have an incentive to make sure that ballot...
That the right kind of votes
exactly
make it.
Exactly right. And that is a temptation that you should not be given to party activists and campaign people. It's a bad idea. It's something that can lead to fraud. That's what happened in North Carolina. Apparently the vote harvester there, they picked up ballots, some of which were blank and not filled out, and they also picked up ballots that had not been signed by a witness, and they filled in the witness signatures later.
I see. So the ballots were picked up empty but arrived full.
Yes.
Wow.
And that's why vote harvesting, which unfortunately is legal now in places like California, it's a bad policy. It's not something that ought to be done because it's going to lead to fraud and manipulation of election results. And absentee ballot fraud is one of the biggest sources of fraud in elections in the country.
So basically this, the vote harvesting will actually kind of favor the party that has the majority of voters, I guess. Is that, I'm trying to think how it will work.
Well,
couldn't both sides play this game, right?
Well, it's going to favor the side that's willing to break the rules to make sure the votes favor their candidates and their parties.
But wait, it's legal. Like I'm missing
it is
something here.
It is legal, but it's a bad idea to make it legal, which is why states like North Carolina have banned it, because they understand it puts too much temptation into the hands of party officials.
I mean, if it was legal and I was on the campaign, hey, I want to use that method, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
fighting a battle here, right? So
That's exactly right.
I get it. I understand you call it temptation. I mean, I think for some people it would be strategy if the law was as such.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And there are cases that I have seen where, in fact, the strategy was to send people in, get a hold of those absentee ballots, and intimidate the voters into voting a particular way, or actually changing the vote. Or the easiest thing, if you're picking up ballots in a particular area, and you know from voter histories that particular individuals vote for candidates of the other party, wow, you can just lose those ballots and not deliver.
Oh my goodness, that doesn't sound good.
Good.
Wait, so okay, in California, it sounds to me like there must have been a lot of ballot harvesting, especially how these different, tight races that basically kind of almost switched over time after the election with
Yes.
the incoming, absentee ballots and so forth. Is this the same thing that's going to happen in 2020? Can we expect any changes in electoral rules and
I'm sure that we will see changes in electoral rules. I hope more states do not adopt vote harvesting as California has. There's also a push by folks on what I call the progressive left to force states to put in, for example, automatic voter registration, which is a bad idea. Automatic voter registration.
Everyone's registered, basically.
What they do is if you go in for a driver's license, if you go in, apply for welfare at a public assistance office, they don't ask you, would you like to vote? They automatically register you to vote. The problem with that is that it leads to duplicate registration.
Okay.
It can lead to people who aren't eligible to vote getting registered, such as non-citizens.
Right.
It can cause all kinds of problems like that, and again, it's not a good idea.
Fascinating. No, I've learned a lot in our conversation here.
Yeah, I could bore you for hours with information.
No, I mean
about
this is things like this actually play such a massive role in outcomes, right?
They
do.
do.
It might sound a little bit boring, but it's actually raising the hair on the back of my neck listening to it.
Right. No, it is
Yeah.
very important, and we
Yeah.
don't pay enough attention to this.
Fascinating information, Hans. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.